All right. Hey, everyone. Sorry for this angle of me talking, but I wanted to really give you a view of the fretboard while we get into the rest of the stream. So I'm going to real quick say hi. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Ian from VOX. If you haven't watched one of these streams before, it's a fun time. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm monitoring them all on my computer right here. And feel free to watch later, or you can come back. This will stay on our Facebook and YouTube pages. Or if I mention one of our previous streams and you haven't seen it, those are also all on our Facebook and YouTube pages. We even have a playlist on the YouTube page for you to watch them all if you are looking for a specific one. So thank you all that are joining us. Hey, JB from Chile. That's great. Thank you for joining us. That's very cool. And we also have Roberto from Paraguay. Very cool. I think, and Christian from Buenos Aires, Argentina. It's great to have you all here. And I'm glad that you could join in right when we were getting started, because this week is another music theory lesson. We did one of these, um, I believe it was 4 weeks ago. We talked about modal mixture and sort of combining scales and modes and all of that stuff that you maybe learn when you're learning guitar, but in a usable way on guitar. And I wanted to expand on that even more this week. And so we are talking all about the CAGED system and chord voicing. And so it is great to have you all here. If you missed that last stream, you can watch it, like I said, saved on our Facebook and YouTube pages. And welcome. I don't want to pronounce your name wrong. I believe it's Agus from Spain. Good to have you here as well. So, yeah, I'm just going to dive into things. You are hearing me play my Fender American Special Telecaster directly into the AC4 that you see right here. Then you are hearing the AC4 through my universal audio aux box. That's giving you a nice clean direct sound so that you have no trouble hearing what I'm playing. And so that is emulating a speaker cabinet. You're not hearing the actual speaker in the AC4, but I have it set like a very British voiced Celestion 112. So it sounds just like what I'm hearing in the room. So, wow, welcome Diego from Argentina. That's two Argentinians. And Ralph from the UK. So, and Victor from California by way of Brazil. So lots of South Americans today. You're right, Victor. And it's good to have everybody joining us here. I really appreciate it. And with that being said, I'm going to dive into this lesson. And if you have any questions or you need me to expand on anything, please leave a comment and I will keep an eye on all of those and try to answer everything. If you have any questions about the AC4, please let me know as well. And if I don't get to your question, you can leave it as a comment on the video once it's saved, and I'll come back and try to answer that way. So let's dive into it. going to adjust my mic real quick. And then, so I have the camera set up this way and that awkward angle for the intro because I wanted you to be able to see my full neck, the full neck of the guitar. So the reason I wanted you to see that is because we are fully talking about chord voicings. And so with chord voicings, you might, I think this is something that at least I don't see talked about as often as maybe I would like to talk about it, or as I would think that people would want to talk about it. But it is interesting how if you play a C chord, just in the open position, that is going to sound different than if I play a C chord up on the neck or even in the same position on the neck, but fretted differently. And so there is a term for this. You might be familiar with the CAGED system. And so that's really what we want to get into this week. So what the CAGED system is, my brief overview of that is basically it's named after these open chord shapes that you are most likely familiar with. So you have C, and then A, and then G, and then E, and then D. The D is a little hard for me to fret up there. That's just my, I'm not typically playing bar chords that high up. So, but the interesting thing about this CAGED system is we just walked through it with C. That's the whole system. If you play a C chord in this C voicing that you're familiar with, so that's the standard cowboy chord version of a C. Then you have their root note right here on the fifth string. If we take that same root note and now switch to an A shape, the C shape told us where the A shape should go. And so that is really helpful because now we don't need to think about where we're fretting. We don't have to think, okay, I want to voice C the same, or play the same chord, but I want to voice it differently. Where do I put my hand? It's just right there. And so for every chord on this system, all of these open chords, C, A, G, E, D, you're going to have that movement from the highest note you're fretting, the highest on the fretboard. So in this A shape, now we bar on that fifth fret and play a G shape. Now with the G shape, we move up to this eighth fret and play an E shape. And now here we're taking right on the 10th fret, but now we're down to the D string and we have that D shape. So what is great about this is you can move quickly between different chord voicings without that struggle of, I know I want this chord, but what's the math to get here? It's all laid out very simply. Now, what can be confusing about this, and the reason I thought this was worth a full lesson, is when you are using this system, it's mostly taught as just what I showed you. An exercise to either move chords or scales up the neck. but you're not really talking about anything beyond that, how this might be applicable to writing music, playing your own music, or playing covers even. And so that's really what I want to get into this this stream. So if you have any questions about this, please let me know as we're going. And if not, I'm just going to keep rolling through things. So basically, when I first learned how to play guitar, and I think a lot of us are the same way, is you learned these cowboy chords or open chords. And those chords help you move through what you wanted to play and how you wanted to implement it. So the step beyond that is taking this system and this lesson that's, put out on paper, like, we're talking about an exercise and moving between these chords. And it's great practice to just simply play the caged sequence with a handful of different chords. And what that will help you do is develop your dexterity and, the muscle memory to move quickly between these chords. But what it doesn't help you do is implement them. So I have a couple examples that I want to show you. Some of these are songs that I've used in the previous streams. Some of them aren't. I'm going to start with the most advanced example, which is maybe counterintuitive. But the reason why I want to start with this is some of the other examples are very subtle. You may not notice the same way that you will with this example. So I figure it's good to start, and I'm going to try to make sure you can really see my fretboard when I play this. It's good to start here with a Steely Dan song. And Steely Dan obviously is known for their intricate chord progressions and chord voicings, and they are, heavily influenced by jazz. So obviously there's a lot more going on to this than just the caged system. They didn't just learn that system and say, how am I going to implement it? They had other knowledge, and they also, more went into play here. But I want to start with it because it's a big, big example. So this is a song, Josie, and it starts on this nice E minor 7. And then it moves to an A/D chord. So what a slash chord is, if you're not familiar, it is an inversion of the chord, or putting a different note in the bass, in the lowest voice. So the lowest string you're playing is different than that root note of the chord. So in this case, I'm playing an A chord, but I'm fretting the D as the lowest note, and I'm not playing this low E string. So you get this A/D chord. And real quick, I want to say hi to Jez Bass from Milton Keys, the home of VOX amps. Good to have you here. I'm glad you could join us. So moving from this A/D chord, we go to a really odd C/G chord, which I love this voicing of it. You have an E, and then a C, and then a D, and then a G, and then back up to the B on the highest note, the highest string. So that's a very nice chord voicing. I'm a big fan of it. So then from there, it goes to this, it's a G/A chord, I believe. And then from there, a G/A. No, this is the G/A. Sorry, the reason I started with this was not to get caught up in what the chord names are. So if I play the example, that has this very nice vibe to it. And now if I play that chord progression just in simple open position chords, now I'm out of tune and I dropped my tuner. Give me 1 second. Fretting some of these Steely Dan chord shapes with fresh strings is popping me right out of tune. So I apologize for that. So back to it. If I play this chord progression, that's a totally different chord progression than what we're hearing. The E minor, A, C, D, G. That sounds very singer-songwriter, very, strumming on these open chords. But if I play how Steely Dan plays it, very, very different thing. And all that is changing the voicing of the chords. And like I said, when I got into that, before we got a little sidetracked by some of the details of what specifically those chords are, the reason why I wanted to show you that is because it's a great example of how changing the voicing of the chord can really change the mood or even the sound of the song that you're playing. And so I think a lot of times I'll think about if you've ever heard like an acoustic cover of a song that wasn't acoustic originally, and you get this open strumming sound. And it's totally, totally different. And the question is, how did it get there? And it's all that chord voicing. And this is why I love chord voicing so much and why I wanted to devote a full stream to it. But as you can tell, it is a little bit more complex than it might seem because we're already 20 minutes into the stream and all I've showed you is one example and one walkthrough of what the caged system is. So now we're going to get right into the big details. So for anyone who is just joining us, we are talking all about chord voicing and the caged system. And I have this camera set up so that you can see my fretting hand and figure out what chords I'm playing. And if you have any questions about what I'm talking about or what I'm playing or the AC4 that you're hearing this all through, please let me know, leave a comment here, and I am happy to answer it. So moving on from there, I want to show you a much more simple example of this chord voicing difference and how big of a difference it can be. So this is maybe a song everybody's familiar with. That's Scar Tissue by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And it has that really nice open voiced, just arpeggiating turning the root and third into this rhythmic pattern. And now if I play those same chords, very simple chord progression. That's an E major, B major, and C sharp minor. If I play those same chords, that can get totally different than even just all we're changing there, unless I start going into playing like these minor 7 and dominant 7 voicings of these chords to try and fit that open strum setting. Even just changing the B from those 2 notes to barring and playing the full B chord makes a huge difference. Or just changing the E chord from up here to down here. So it's amazing how much a simple change can make. So Jeremy, great to have you. Thank you for joining in on the stream. So another example just like that is a Radiohead song, Reckoner, from In Rainbows. That's just C major, E minor, and D major. So that I can really move to this open cowboy chord land. And now you have this totally different sound from, and that is a very simple change. That's a change where if you learn this caged system, you can really quickly say, you don't have to rack your brain and think, what are the voicings, the frettings of an E minor chord that I know. Off the top of your head, you might have learned those 2 examples, but you could take that and say, that's a little bit too high, but that's too low. What can I do in between? And you can end up with the D shape voicing of E minor. There's ways to move between here without memorizing. It's like figuring out the patterns in math as opposed to memorizing the multiplication tables. So yes, Ralph asked inversions, and I'm not sure if you said that, Ralph, while I was talking about the Steely Dan song and the slash chords, or if it was just a question of how do inversions play into all this. And the answer is, it ties perfectly into my next example, where a very simple inversion can change that sound of the chord in a meaningful way. So my favorite inversion. So what an inversion is, for those of you who don't know, an inversion would be playing. So if we play the C chord, now I want to play this C chord, the same chord. I'm not changing any notes within it, but I don't want the C to be in the bass. I can do that a lot of ways. I could just play starting a string higher, and that would be a third inversion, which means first inversion, I apologize, which means starting on the 3rd scale degree of the chord. Or with this C shape, my favorite inversion, and you've probably heard me play it so many times during the streams. If you've watched them, you certainly heard me play it during the intro, is that's a C chord. That's an inversion of the C chord where we have the G in the bass. So basically all I'm doing is fretting the third string on that low E, the third string on the A, and then the second, or I'm sorry, fret. So the third fret on the low E, third fret on the A, and the second fret on the D. And if I wanted, I could fret that first fret on the B string. So all of the notes from the regular C chord are there. If I remove that low string, but adding it in gives this really this thickness to a chord and kind of a commanding but unstable sound. Like it's powerful, but it's not quite the same resolution as the chord with the root in the bass. And so a lot of what you're doing with, or what you can do with moving between these chord shapes in that caged system. So if you're just joining us and you didn't see my explanation earlier, the caged system is basically that you can play the same chords across the neck using the C, A, G, E, and D shapes in a pattern that links up in a very easy to understand way, easy to move between them, which is helpful if you're improvising or jamming with your bandmates and want to play the same chord but want to move to a different voicing and want it to sound different. So this example, I did play it on the last music theory stream that we did because it's also a great, later in the song, a great example of modal mixture. But this is an Elliott Smith song, Pretty Ugly Before. And Elliott Smith is just a master, in my opinion, of these chord voicings. And if you really listen through his discography, you'll find that sometimes the sweetness he pulls out of his chord progressions is from a very simple chord progression, a very recognizable chord progression. And he just changed a note or two, and it really gives this emotional quality to it. So this chord progression is, it starts on that C inversion and then goes to a D chord shape with the F sharp in the bass. And then back to a standard G chord. So you get this like uneasy, slightly unstable C chord. The D with that F sharp in the bass adds this movement to it. And then the resolution on the G. I really, really like that because, when you talk about these 4-5-1 chord progressions, that is not, that's the standard way of playing it using the A and E bar chord shapes. And that's not super emotional in the way that, there's a special something going on there with just changing the shape of these chords. So if I even play it as those three chords in the same position, that open C, D, G, that's a very, very different feeling in the end from how he recorded the song. So just a really, really amazing, in my opinion, example of what not only these chord voicings, but inversions, like Ralph had mentioned, can do to your chord progressions. So now I'm going to move through a couple more examples, and please, if you have any questions, let me know in the chat, or if you need anything clarified, if you want me to explain a chord shape, please let me know. But I'm going to just show how some of this can be applied as opposed to sticking with those practice regimens and things like that, where I'm fairly certain there's a Premier Guitar article where it will have patterns for playing scales and chords across the neck to practice this CAGED system. But I want to show you a few of my favorite examples of using these different chord voicings. So one that actually doesn't show up in the CAGED system, but I think is very relevant, is that open voicing of the E major chord. So what I'm doing is playing the G sharp an octave up on the A string, and then the low E open. And so then you can ring out that B and E high strings, but in this voicing you have to avoid these two center strings, the G and D. This is an amazing song by Courtney Barnett and Kurt Vile from their collaboration album that came out a few years ago. And it has this very melodic chord progression. So it starts on that E. That's just the F sharp sliding up to G sharp. So then it goes up to the same thing on the A, same exact voicing. And a little bit of melody to move to the next chord. And then you get this F sharp minor and E major, but in that same voicing as that open C with the G in the bass. So they have this very, settled but not final quality to them, where if I play them down lower on the neck, oh, looks like you lost me. That means my camera is dying. That's not good. So I'm going to keep talking while I fix this issue, and I'm going to have to switch to my webcam. That is really a shame, but we'll see what we can do. So that changing of that chord voicing gives you the ability to, instead of have those very like almost too much resolution to that chord progression, too much finality, the way it moves. And so, I would use that in this context if it was kind of a jazz song or more of a crooner type thing. It really has a resolution to it, where if I play it up on the neck, it feels final, but not fully final. It's not the ending of the song. it's kind of wrapping into this nice resolution to just that chord progression. So thank you, YM. I can't see the YouTube emojis through the streaming service that I'm using, but I assume that is a thumbs up or something like that. I apologize. I will have to figure out. I have to test setting this all up before I go live, and so that ate through my battery. So now I know next time, put a fresh battery in right before I go live. So thank you all for sticking with me through that technical difficulty, but you can still see me and hear me, I hope. And now, if you have any questions or anything like that, please let me know. If not, I'm going to wrap up with a few more of my favorite examples, and then we can kind of end the stream and look forward to the stream next week. Or maybe you can look back at our previous music theory stream, which is live on our YouTube page and Facebook. We keep those up for anybody to watch whenever you get the time. So this is a song that uses a similar voicing of the chords. And so this is a song by Japanese Breakfast called 12 Steps. And it starts on this same, I hope you can see my hand there with all of my banners going on at the bottom. So it starts with this same inversion of the D major chord. And then it moves to an A minor. And then an E minor. Those are, I'm just playing those two open notes, the root and the third, which then walks down. And it has this nice, very calm feeling to it, where if I played that same chord progression in these open chords, so that's a great question from Victor. I'm glad you asked this, but because I had not considered talking about this. So if you are playing in a band and you're soloing over a C chord, or let's say you're in C major, you can choose to solo one of two ways. You can play over that key, which is, I think, how most people approach it. That's more of a standard way of putting together your lead lines and solos. But because of that huge influence of modal jazz and Miles Davis and all of these very, very, very prolific jazz players who explored this territory of the modes and how we can use that in music, basically, a lot of people took from that if I'm playing a song in C, when I'm playing C major, I can play over C major or a number of other scales that work well with it. And then if I go to E minor, I can pick a whole new set of chords. And now this is a bit of an oversimplification of modal jazz. If you are interested in something like this, please leave a comment, and I can certainly post some resources once the stream is live. I can leave that as a comment. But basically, when you get to pick a scale for each chord, you're given these wide open possibilities of the E minor, which has a function in C major, now can have any function that feels the same as that function in C major, but can behave differently. So you can play natural minor over what would be that Phrygian scale, and you get a whole different sound. which really ties into the last music theory stream we did a few weeks ago, which was all about modal mixture and how you can apply that. So how does that come into play here when we're talking chord voicings? So this is such a great question. I'm going to kind of use it to wrap up everything and tie all of what I've been talking about together. So when you're playing over this, cowboy open C, you might have a certain scale that you play that's in that position, or maybe you have a pentatonic scale or some altered scale that works well with that chord in that position. But I think a lot of us, when we learned about scales and soloing, we learned, you can stay in that position, you can move it up to this position, you have that flexibility. Basically, what I've been talking about and what the CAGED system is having that same flexibility across the neck with chords. And so if I voice the C like we have been, my favorite voicing of that, as opposed to the standard open voicing, you're playing the exact same notes in the chord, or the band is playing the exact same notes. And so when you go to solo, you can play identical to what you would if you were using a standard chord voicing. Or you can use that as an opportunity to play with some of these feelings and the differences in emotion or vibe, or whatever you want to call it, within that chord, where you get a different sound, a different quality. You could, if you're playing that C major with the G as the root, you could maybe play based around a G chord or a G scale, maybe the G major pentatonic, or maybe you could bring in just G Lydian, which would be C major, or G Mixolydian, which would be C major. But because you're treating the G as your tonal center, it has a whole different feeling to it and emphasizes that within the chord voicing. So I think Steely Dan, which I didn't show a ton of in this because I didn't want to get too complex, I think they're kind of the perfect example to look for this type of answer, because they do precisely that. They take a lot of odd chord voicings, or certainly not those open chords that we all learn first, and they apply them in ways that are heavily influenced by jazz, and so bringing in a lot of this this theory knowledge into the equation, but they keep it pretty rock and pop sensible. So you're not getting a different genre. I mean, if you've heard Steely Dan, they certainly sound different from your average rock band. Steely Dan and AC/DC don't sound the same, but they're a lot closer to, at least in the way we listen to them, like a shallow listening, which I mean not in the sense of shallow as being bad, but when you put on Steely Dan, your impressions are a lot closer to something like AC/DC or Prince, or anything that's rock and pop oriented, than putting on Steely Dan and thinking, oh yeah, Miles Davis, Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock. So I think they're a great example of how these are merged, but they're certainly in that jazz realm. But that's where that concept of soloing over chords as opposed to soloing over a key comes from. So Steely Dan is like a perfect case study, a perfect lesson. Like if you sit down and just dive into a song and learn the chord progression and then learn the melodies and see how that's all interacting, they do it so well. But to bring everything home, to tie it all together, do you need to play a different scale when you're using these chord voicings? Or do you need to communicate that chord with the bassist in your band or the second guitar player in your band differently? And the answer is no, because if I play C like this, or like this, or like that, if I play any of those voicings of C, the notes internally are all C, or not each note is C, but they all spell out the chord C. So changing between this and this means nothing on paper, means nothing to how your bassist might want to accompany you, but means something to the emotion of the song and something to maybe how you want to structure melodies to complement that. So it's a bit of a complex answer. I guess I would boil it down to you don't have to, but you can, and you can use this as a tool. And the reason why I wanted to go over this topic is because it's an excellent tool to expand your songwriting and even expand playing a cover where you are not limited to just the standard chord voicings. You know, if I wanted to cover, an AC/DC song, just because that was my example already. If I wanted to cover an AC/DC song, but give it a different atmosphere, you can try changing up the chord voicings, which, if you were here at the beginning of the stream, I mentioned that sort of acoustic cover sound that a lot of singer-songwriters have because of this, because playing in that open voicing has a very specific sound compared to that's a really, really small change. I played, well, not the same chords because I was moving around a bit, but the G and D are the same, but they feel a little bit different and they behave a little bit different while letting you play the same chords, sing the same melodies, play the same scales over them. So that's what this all distills down to. Before I play us out, I want to say one more time, I said this in the last stream, and I think it's worth repeating each time we talk about music theory, that these are not rules and these are not things that you need to learn and then abide by. Music theory is a great way to talk about music and talk about how we hear, play, or experience music, but it doesn't have to be set in stone rule. And that's where I think a lot of guitar players who choose not to learn music theory, which I think is just as great as learning it. A lot of guitar players who choose not to learn music theory do it because they don't want to follow the rules. But you don't need to look at these as rules. You can look at them as tools in your toolbox where maybe you're writing a song the same way you always write songs and you're stuck. So you think, well, let me break out some of those chord inversions and see what that does to the bridge. That might change the atmosphere. So that is my summation of it all. I hope you all enjoyed this stream. I appreciate you sticking with me through that slight technical difficulty. Victor, thank you for your question and for sticking around for the stream. I hope you dive into some Steely Dan and really enjoy it. My favorite Steely Dan album is Aja. It's spelled AJA. That's where Josie comes from, and it is a fantastic, fantastic album. And like I said, a great way to think about music as sort of a case study. And Ralph, that's a great way to kind of put it all together. It might change the way you use the same scale, but it doesn't have to. It's an option and a flavor that you can keep in your back pocket and use it when you'd like. but stick with the basics when you would like to do that, because sometimes the basics are what works. So thank you all for joining me. This was a great stream, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you are just joining us late in the stream, this will be saved and archived on our YouTube and Facebook pages. It takes a little bit of time to process, so check back tomorrow maybe, and it will be up to watch, and we will leave it there. And we will be back with another stream next week. And until then, I hope you can enjoy exploring some of these concepts. So thanks.